Good evening. Firstly, thank you everyone for making it on what is a wild, wet, windy night. So well done all of you for taking the trouble and taking the effort to be here. We've got a really wide range of people here. So we've got some, I would guess, from Marlborough College. Yeah, we've got some from St John's School. We've got people from right all the way through the age ranges. We've got lots and lots of diversity. That's exactly what we need. So we hope that the questions will reflect that. I'm just waiting for all the four candidates to join me. They're going to be here any moment now. But I just thought I'd just take this moment to explain briefly, while I have this chance, that the whole idea is for you to ask questions. So we're going to try and get questions from the floor. But what we want are questions. We do not want long, rambling diatribes about, your great aunt's left foot causing the door to be open, and we don't need it. We want the question, okay? And I'm afraid if you do start to ramble, you're going to get cut. And now, the other part is you've got to remember is that some of you who will want to ask questions won't get picked. So I'm really sorry about that. I apologise to you in advance. We will do our best to spread the questions around. But again, we're looking for diversity of questions. So if you feel the question that is already your topic's being covered, save us from getting a repetitive one. Let's get a different question. But anyway, enough from me for the moment. We'll do a little bit more, but I'd like to just ask the candidates and Reverend Chris Smith if you could join me up here. So could you give them a welcome, perhaps? Let's hope it stays like that, shall we? That's really good.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I just add my welcome on behalf of Marlborough Churches Together. My name is Reverend Chris Smith. I'm the new vicar here, and we're delighted to be holding this hustings, and we welcome all of you as the audience and all the candidates as well. In my last parish, we had someone who worked at Labour HQ. We had Paddy Ashdown, spin doctor, and we had someone who was standing as a Conservative candidate. And they all got along fine. And I hope that we're all going to get on in a similar spirit tonight. You'll remember that St Paul encourages us to pray for those in authority over us. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to agree with them, but he does encourage us to pray for them. And so I thought this evening I'd lead us in a prayer as we begin. Father, thank you so much for everyone who's here tonight. Thank you for our candidates. Thank you for our chair. Thank you for our audience. We pray your blessing over this evening, and we pray we all might get the most out of it. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to hand over to Keith.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Chris. As you are aware, this is organised by Marlborough Churches Together, and we see it as a really important opportunity for the people living in and around Marlborough to have this chance to meet the candidates. It's a really important moment in our lives. So we're not going to dilly-dally around. I'm going to ask I think we agreed that if we ask Emma, first of all, we're going to ask them just to give you a little, very brief, succinct little opening speech, and then we're going to get into the questions.
Would you get into a spaceship with your children, knowing that there's a chance that you won't survive? Ladies and gentlemen, you are on a spaceship. It is called Planet Earth, and we have a climate emergency. The Green Party understands science and has policies based on evidence. We tell the truth. Our policies are developed with input from experts. The good news is we know how to tackle the climate emergency, and it involves creating purposeful work all around the country, installing on and offshore wind turbines, solar and tidal power stations, insulating people's homes and workplaces, and electrifying and improving public transport. I'm a Cambridge graduate. I have a PhD in material science and an MBA, and a passion for economics. The terrible spending cuts we've had are causing extreme hardship and have brought public services to their knees. The tragedy is they were not necessary. Our government could have borrowed at low interest rates, but they made the political choice not to do so. Now we urgently need to reverse these cuts and invest to enable a zero-carbon economy. Only the Green Party really gets this. Time is fast running out to stop irreversible, damaging changes to our climate. For your children's future, vote Green.
Thank you very much. Danny.
Thank you very much. I'm Danny Kruger. I'm the Conservative candidate. I'm going to very quickly introduce myself and give a couple of headlines about what I think. I am from the Cotswolds. I grew up on a farm there. My parents ran a successful catering business. I worked in politics and journalism, and most recently I spent 10 years in working in community projects. Founded a charity working with prisoners and ex-offenders, and I ran that for nearly 10 years, and subsequently a project working with children and young people. And most recently worked in government again with Boris Johnson, where I've been the political secretary in number 10. As that suggests to you, I'm in favour of Brexit, and I voted leave, and I support the PM's deal and our determination to get out of the EU with a deal next in January if we can get a majority in this election. I am committed to supporting the rural economy and our rural communities. That includes tackling the huge crisis of climate change, but also supporting rural businesses, supporting farmers as we leave the EU. This is a military area, and I'm committed to helping military families, veterans, and to ensure that this brilliant development that's happening, which is the rebasing of the armoured brigades from Germany, is a success, and that we can welcome back the soldiers and integrate them really successfully into Wiltshire. And I think we have a lot to do on public services. There are significant problems. Although funding is pouring into the public sector, it is not reaching rural communities sufficiently, and the funding formula that supports schools, hospitals, the health service and policing doesn't take account of the challenges of rural areas. So that is a political priority that we need to tackle. And lastly, and more personally, I, having spent many years working very locally with communities, quite far from central government, I recognise the huge power that communities have to rise up and tackle their own challenges, and for neighbourhoods to come together in partnership with government. This is not some alternative to public services. We need taxation, we need public services, but fundamentally we need strong communities. And what I believe in, and I've seen it, in the most brilliant few weeks meeting all sorts of different organisations and seeing local pubs and post offices and community shops that have been saved by the community. That's the kind of spirit that I'm so impressed by in this area, and that personally is what I want to support if I'm your MP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rachel.
So I live here in the Pewsey Vale, nearby, and have done for about 25 years now. I'm a local businesswoman and a working mum, and my work has involved me travelling to Europe and beyond, working at board level with executives on equality and leadership. And 40 years ago, as somebody reminded me, I studied foreign languages at Cambridge University. But I believe that we have reached a crucial moment in history now, in this general election. We have to decide what kind of country we want to be. 2 years ago, I was so disheartened by the direction our country was taking, I decided to stop shouting at the telly, stand up and do something about it. So I joined the Labour Party, whose values of community, equality, fairness and respect resonate with my own. And more recently, I've been involved in volunteering locally, and I'm a trustee with Open Doors, a charity in Devizes. So my next wake-up call politically really was working with parents and the community, campaigning to save the closure of two very important outdoor education centres, Oxenwood and Braeside. I feel that we not only face a moment in history, we're facing a twin existential threat, a climate crisis that has been referred to, and we'll be talking more about that tonight, I'm sure, but also, at the same time, an inequality crisis. So I feel this is a once-in-a-generation choice, And we need radical, bold change. We need the vision that Labour brings, and that is why I'm here. I stand before you tonight, and I would be honoured to serve as your MP.
Joe.
Good evening, I'm Jo Waltham and I'm standing for the Liberal Democrats in this, my home constituency. I moved to Marlborough in 2013 with my husband, children, dogs and my small business. Being an MP was never on my personal agenda until now. I'm not a career politician, but I'm standing because I'm appalled by the lurch to the extreme left by the Labour Party and to the extreme right by the Conservative Party. I believe in an open and tolerant society that the Liberal Democrats have always stood for. I'm standing because the social contract is broken. Working hard is no longer a guarantee for a warm home to live in, food on the table, health and social care when you need them, and a good education for your children. And no matter what Johnson and Farage say, Brexit will not fix this. It will only make matters worse. Remaining in the EU is not only about protecting jobs, but it's about identity and opportunities for our children. I am English, I am British, but I am also European. I have lived and worked and studied in other EU countries, and I want the same freedom for my children. I do not want my country to become a low regulation, low tax, no public services offshoot of the USA. While stopping Brexit was what got me involved in politics, it's not the only thing I care about. Locally, I've campaigned to reduce the travel times of our children in Marlborough with special educational needs against the closure of Ralford Special School in Devizes. I've also been involved in the Liberal Democrat motion at Wiltshire Council to declare a climate emergency. Climate change worries me. The most important message from climate scientists is that we need to start worldwide reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The political parties are so focused on trying to outcompete each other when they plan to be carbon neutral that we're not actually getting started. We have the technology, we know what to do, we need the political will, and we can't delay any longer. So that's just a few things that matter to me, and what I would like to hear now is what matters to you.
Thank you, all of you. We're now down to the bit you've all been waiting for. Can I have any hands up for questions? That gentleman was the person I saw first, so for better or worse, richer or poorer, sickness and in health, it's all down to you.
Amen. What do you like or dislike most about the oven-ready withdrawal bill? What did you like or dislike most about it when you voted in the referendum in 2016?
Thank you. Okay. Who'd like to start off?
I didn't like any of it, but I didn't know about it. But I didn't vote leave, I did vote remain in the EU referendum in 2016.
I recognise the phrase oven ready. When we go back to 2016, 3 years ago now, isn't it? We really were responding to not something that we were particularly thinking about at the time, I don't think. It was a project that was put together for different reasons, for political reasons, as we know, by David Cameron and so on. And they came to the people for a say, but I don't think we did have very good information. Referenda need to be run after there's been really good discussions, ideally some kind of citizens' assemblies that would have explored issues. I think now we know far more. At the time, I voted Remain. I believe still that our best deal is to remain in Europe, but I also believe that, and I feel very comfortable with where Labour's got to, which is to go back to the people for a final say. It's a very straightforward situation now. We started with the people 3 years ago, and I think now, knowing what we know now, we need to go back and have a binding final vote.
Thank you very much.
In 2016 I voted leave, and I did that because I think that in the 21st century power should be more local and more accountable, and we need to be in control of the decisions which affect us. And I want to see a great devolution of power in our country, and I want that to happen as a result of Brexit, and I think that it will. So that's why I voted leave. In terms of the deal that we've got, I like it because it guarantees our exit from the EU with a deal, rather than the disruption that would have been caused with no deal. And what it does is it delivers Brexit. It means that we have control of our laws, our borders, our money, our trade, once again, and we can be an independent country, and then able to form all the links and the relationships and the connections and the arrangements with our European friends and with other countries around the world. It is in the history and the nature of this country. We are an open, internationalist, trading country. And of course we will be closely related to Europe and to the EU in future, but we will do so on our own terms. I don't think going back to the people with a further referendum is appropriate until we've delivered on the mandate of the first one. By all means, you know, if people want to argue later we should be rejoining the EU, then that's the case to be made at that point. But let's deliver the first referendum before we have a second.
So if we have any trade deals, we lose sovereignty. If we make a trade deal with the USA, what we'll find is that they're a bigger country than us. We will have to abide by their regulations, and they have much lower environmental regulations than we do. So any trade deal with anybody will lose the sovereignty. So what I don't like about the deal, well, the current deal that Boris Johnson's made, it removes the legally binding commitment to non-regression in areas such as climate, air quality, biodiversity. So that means that we won't have to do those things anymore. And it also ends the requirement to have an enforcement body so that we enforce our environmental standards. And so the Green Party policy has always been, from the day after the referendum, vote leave cheated, they were fined for it, it was a very close call, let's negotiate a deal but then have a ratification referendum, a people's vote, so that we actually know the deal on the table, we have a people's vote, and we will see that through. So if people still vote to leave, then I will make sure that that happens.
Thank you. Gentleman there with the very smart yellow. No, yellow. You don't look. It doesn't look as if it's yellow to me, but I am colourblind apparently.
Thank you. My question is on climate change. Now, the government's own committee on climate change in 2019 reported that looking at of the 25 policies that the government set itself.
What's the question?
Okay, I'm getting to that. It had only achieved one. Now, my question, and that it also said that there was no coherent policy. My question to the panelists is, what would you do about making sure that we do meet the agreement, the Paris Agreement, and what can we do now?
Dan, would you like to start?
Okay. So I'm not as terrified as some of my colleagues on the panel here are about the climate situation, and as many of you will be. So I want to state that explicitly. I'm not going to enter a sort of rhetorical war about how awful our situation is and how desperately we need to act. I think there is a very serious situation with climate change. There's no doubt that our emissions are contributing to climate change, which will be catastrophic if it's not changed. The International Panel on Climate Change said that what we need to do is to get carbon neutral in this country by 2050. It said that is possible and realistic and achievable, and that is going to take a lot of work. And that is what the government is committed to doing. And it can do that without the enormous disruption and the economic meltdown that will be risked by the changes that are proposed by those who think that we could immediately alter the whole basis of our economy, which is, of course, way too carbon reliant. So we need to do a lot of things, including investing government money in alternative technology, but mostly we should be investing in R&D, in the innovation and the science base of our country, which leads the world in climate technology already. We need to see more of that, because the answer to climate change is not government action. It is action by scientists, entrepreneurs and businesses which will find the technology which will change the basis of our economy. It is innovation. I'm afraid to say that means the capitalist system which we need, it's human ingenuity is the answer to our climate challenge, just like it is to every other challenge. And we need to invest in the science base and support businesses which are developing alternative technologies. So that's my simple answer, is we need more effective markets which will produce best systems.
Thank you. Yeah, by all means.
Well, what we've heard from the IPCC is that the ambition in the 2015 Paris Agreement needs to be 5 times higher if we're going to stay below 1.5 degrees warming. And we're not on target to meet our UK's 2023 target. So that we're, you know, it's pretty dire. At the moment, the costs of polluting are not what economists call internalised. That means that if you know, driving a petrol vehicle or something, you know, the cost of that, the cost of the damage it's doing, doesn't come through. So what we propose is a tax on carbon with the proceeds distributed equally to everyone. So that would help if you want to have your market system. But otherwise, we need to do things so quickly that, you know, we should be putting money into, putting money into insulating people's homes, and people often aren't in a position to be able to do that. We should be, changing the regulations about building wind turbines, of course with the agreement of local communities. And local communities should be the people who are the people who take the decisions about how their community is going to get to net zero, and whether they want to have solar panels on local barn roofs, or whether they want to have an anaerobic digester or whatever it is. And each community will have a different solution, but the central government has got to help and provide funds for this, and provide training, which will be needed in huge quantities to get people trained up to be able to bring in all of these changes that we need.
Thank you very much.
So I think where we probably fundamentally disagree, Danny, you and I, is on the role of government in leadership, because this strikes me as a leadership issue. Internationally, globally, after the Paris Agreement, there had been some leadership, and a very important agreement was made there, but that has fallen off with the US particularly. And I feel that in this country, we need to show leadership on this. It is a climate emergency. I think probably all in this room would be agreed on that. Labour has set an ambitious target. Now, as a businesswoman, I know about setting vision and targets. It's an ambition, it's something to move towards. So 2030, net zero carbon, again with the Green Party, an agreement on this too, is where we are heading, and that I believe is important as a target that we set. That will stimulate motivation towards that, and our role in government is to make sure that we set the economy such that we can reach that target. So Labour would create hundreds of thousands of new green jobs. It would actually be an opportunity to what we call a green industrial revolution, so bringing together the innovation, the good green jobs that can, as it were, recreate that industrial revolution for Britain. But it won't just happen if it's left to businesses or to charities. It has to be led by government. And yes, we would, I'm sure, see a blossoming of home insulation. We would retrofit houses. to the level that we saw perhaps last post-war in terms of housing development. Solar panels on libraries, practical things like that. And very locally, a good example of when some strategic leadership could be shown is at Swindon, where a new gigafactory will be built, and that will replace the Honda jobs that are being lost there very sadly. So that to me is leadership, strategic, bold vision.
Thank you.
So we already have some of the technology. We already know how to get energy from solar farms and from wind farms. And I don't know if you've noticed around Wiltshire, we've certainly got plenty of windy hilltops, but no wind farms. And why is that? And that is because of conservative planning laws. So we would like to free those up so that we are more free to be able to, subject to local planning of course, have more wind farms and generally basically have 80% of our electricity being generated from renewable power. Now, we don't have all the answers, aviation fuel, things like that. So we need to be capturing carbon at the same time so that it is effectively net zero. So one way to do that is to plant 6 million trees a year, sequestering carbon in that. We need to finish the electrification of our railways. We need to encourage financial services to encourage green investments. The Liberal Democrats would also reopen the Department of Climate Change and Natural Resources and have a Chief Secretary for Sustainability in the Treasury so that it is central to every single government decision. We will also require local governments to set their carbon neutral plan. So obviously I was involved in the Wiltshire Council climate emergency declaration, but not only just asking them to do it, we would provide them with the funds and the authority to do it. I just have a whole suite of different suggestions. Obviously insulating the homes, that will not only help, that will also help with fuel poverty and all of that sort of thing. Obviously it was the Liberal Democrats who brought in the plastic bag charge, so reducing our single-use plastics, and we would like to make sure that all new non-recyclable single-use plastics are gone within 3 years. I could probably go on, but I'm aware we're short on time.
One there. We're going to go up the back. Gentlemen, not quite at the very back, but no, the one not stood up is the next one. That's it. Thank you very much indeed.
Do I have to pay for anything? No?
No, that's it, you're off.
Good evening. I've come along because I, for the first time in my 70-year life, do not know how to vote. I'm sorry to tell you that, because I have seen some terrible behaviour in our government. I feel very sad that I'm finding it difficult to trust, and that's the word, trust our politician who should be seriously running our country. Please, my children would be castigated for the sort of behaviour I have witnessed.
I have to ask, what's your question, sir?
My question is, who can I trust?
I think you gave us a very good question. So, who'd like to start? Yeah?
I'm aware that standing up here, I am asking for your trust, because I am asking for you to trust me to A, represent you in Parliament and make decisions on your behalf, and B, to help you with any local issues that you might experience. So I'm fully aware it's a position of trust, and I would hope to be able to demonstrate that if you should vote for me and elect me.
Thank you.
Well, I think trust is something that is extremely important. I think also bringing facts to the table. So when you have a discussion, it's fine to have people with different opinions, but you want to discuss things over facts, not lies, so that people make good decisions. who to vote for, it is, a real tragedy that we don't have proportional representation, because that means that many voters. So, here I think the only thing that makes sense is to vote with your heart, because it actually probably won't make a difference.
All yours.
Thank you. So I take your question to apply at two levels, ourselves and the party leaders, because in a sense you're voting for both. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm trustworthy. That would be difficult to convince you of. I just have to. You can't just say this. Trust me is the least trust-inspiring phrase. All I can point to is who I am and what I've done, and invite you to take me as you see me tonight. And for what it's worth, I do promise that if I'm elected, my commitment to this area is such that these debates have been very civilised that we've had over the last couple of weeks. They've been really useful and important, and there's so much that I do agree with that my colleagues here are saying, particularly around local issues, and I want to be the...
So how about your leader?
Okay, we'll move on to that. I want to be the MP for everyone, is the point I was just trying to get to there. So, my leader, I'm trying to think of a way to say this that isn't going to make you all laugh derisively.
No, we could do it.
Okay, all right, listen, so here's the issue. The reason Boris gets all this grief about trustworthiness is not because he's broken his word. He hasn't done that at all. I would be interested to know what exactly, where exactly you think that he's broken his word. Perhaps give them in the questions, or talk to me afterwards. But let me make this point, ladies and gentlemen, because this is the crucial thing. The reason why he attracts this criticism is because he is actually speaking a fundamental truth that a lot of people in our country don't want to hear. And that truth is this, that we have an obligation as politicians to honour the referendum of 2016. And he is saying that. He's also saying this fundamental truth that a lot of people don't like, that this country has a great future as an independent nation. That is also a truth that I challenge you to deny. So those two truths, this country has a great future outside the EU and we must honour the referendum, are why he aggravates so many people. And they pick on other things. They pick on small mistakes that he might have made. He is no worse than every other politician or journalist that you have come across in that respect. And what he does is he connects with human beings because he is himself very human. And what he is, and the point was made about leadership, he is a leader. Unlike, I'm afraid to say, the so-called leaders of the other parties who are all committed to going backwards and to prevaricating and to trying to fudge their way out of this situation that we're in. There's only one way to unite our country, to bring our country back together and to deliver the glorious future that surely we all believe this country has outside the EU, and that is to get Brexit behind us, go through it, and then set about, frankly, what Boris Johnson stands for, all his record confirms, a centrist, one nation, uniting government. That is what he stands for. He is not an extreme right-winger, as we heard earlier. It's contrary. He voted for Ken Clarke years ago. He is a centrist. He is a centrist, but he believes in honouring the result of the referendum. So do I. Thank you.
So that fundamental question of yours, thank you very much. Who can I trust? It is a profound question for our times, I think. It strikes me that democracy is in danger of being broken because our politicians have lost their relationship with the truth. Lying is day to day. It's written on the side of a bus, it's said in passing, it almost seems to be that truth has left the building. So, as a leader myself, I work as a local businesswoman, as you know, but I've also been the chair of the Labour Party recently, and colleagues will tell you that when I see unfairness, if there's something going on that I don't agree with or that I think is wrong, I will speak up. And I think that's part of building trust. When you spot something that's not right, you're prepared to challenge it and to speak up. I also, as a political hopeful, if you like, I want to be able to sleep at night. I cannot understand how some of our political leaders can actually sleep at night.
So does that include your leader?
I think it does, and I'll tell you why. Now, I know he's not everyone's cup of tea, but Jeremy Corbyn is what I would call an authentic person. He has always stood by his principles. He's deeply rooted, actually, in Wiltshire soils. You know, he was born in Chippenham and lived at one point in our own village, actually. And what he said recently was, I just want a decent society. I think he understands the depth of change that's needed. But I think that overall, we need to reset trust. And I would counsel you to read the manifesto. It's our own manifesto, and obviously all of them before you make your decision. But I'm very proud about our fully costed 2019 manifesto. Read it through. It absolutely is fully costed, unlike the Conservatives, I have to say. There's a grey book that I can send you which gives you all the details of all the finances. But I do worry about how our political parties are funded, for example. And I worry about some of the investigations that are going on around Cambridge Analytica. So yes.
No. We will come back, I promise you. We will come back, but I just want to just very briefly touch on this thing about the costing, if you like. Is there anything you want to add on this, in the sense that we've got to trust these people with vast sums of our money? So,
I mean, just quickly on that. Rachel says their manifesto is costed. Suddenly, after the manifesto was published, they suddenly found £58 billion to support pensioners. So
sit down. It is the question. It's about trust. Will you please sit down and we'll just continue, then we can get to more questions.
And it's also the case that the Conservative manifesto is not costed, it is entirely costed. All of our manifestos are costed, we put the prices on them. Everybody then challenges them, and that's the business of politics. But,
do you have anything you want to say on that?
So the Lib Democrat manifesto is also fully costed, and I have a sheet of paper here with it on somewhere. Obviously, we're planning quite a big expenditure in infrastructure, and we're expending a lot of money on improving our schools and all of that sort of thing. All the big promises that you've heard from everybody. But what makes our manifestos different is we have it as a given that we are remaining in the EU, and we will have the £50 billion Remain bonus that we'll have that additional tax revenue that we can spend on things. I do not understand how the Conservatives think that they can fulfil all of their manifesto commitments when we leave the EU. And I also would be very interested to know, with regards to the Labour manifesto, whether that's costed on leaving the EU or remaining.
Well, that's something for another day. Thank you. Very briefly, Emma.
Our manifesto is fully costed. We're going to spend £100 billion a year on averting the climate disaster, and that will be paid for by primarily by debt. So by selling green bonds. We should not be frightened of having government debt. It's not the same as private debt, and it really. Every country has got huge government debt. It doesn't matter. Money, plus and minus go hand in hand. It's something that people have been conned with this idea that it's going to be a disaster for our grandchildren. It isn't a disaster. There were huge debts in the Second World War. It doesn't matter in the long run. And what does matter is keeping our planet, our climate. So
Thank you. No, we're going to move on. We've got a question at the front here. We're going to have someone from the younger set, and I'm going to work my way back, and then we'll come round. But right, gentleman here in the front. By all means. Yeah. Next one will be.
How can we trust Jeremy Corbyn to fight for the best Brexit deal possible when he wouldn't even support it in a referendum?
Okay.
How can we trust Jeremy Corbyn to fight for the best Brexit deal possible when he wouldn't support it in a referendum?
So that's a question you're aiming at me, I think. Are we happy to...
Yeah, you start off.
Okay. So, what we're suggesting now is actually very straightforward. We would go back to the people for a final say. Now, there has been discussions ongoing with Europe, and what is being suggested by Boris and by the Conservatives would be potentially a crash-out deal. Now, if that were to happen, that would be the beginning of a very long process. It would be the beginning of negotiations with US deals, etc. What Labour's suggesting is something actually that could be done much quicker, which would be a customs union. It would be something that is aligned with the environmental and workers' rights within Europe. So it would be much more like existing deals, for example, in Norway. So it would be a quicker process, which is why Labour has said we would go back to Europe, we would see if we could negotiate a better deal. We really need to negotiate a better deal than crash out, because that is going to decimate our farming communities, our businesses here locally, and have a huge impact on the environment. So we must negotiate a better deal if we possibly can. But we've put a timeline on that, and we've said within 6 months we'll go back to the people. Now I think that's a practical, sensible, we are where we are, no one wants to be here, but we are where we are, and that seems to me a sensible place to be, rather than either the extreme of a crash-out deal, or as the Lib Dems are saying, revoke, which seems to me a bit of a slap in the face with 52% of good vote. So that's where we are, that's where he is.
Rachel, would you then support the deal that had been negotiated?
You mean if it were put back to the people?
Yes.
Yes, I would.
So you'd be voting to leave in the next referendum?
I would be relying on going back to the people and listening to what they say in the light of the information we now have.
So
what I would not support is what I think I heard you say the other night, which is that if we didn't manage to negotiate, you would be comfortable with
I know you're voting against our deal, but would you vote for or against your deal?
Are we carrying on? I'm happy to.
Last riposte.
As I said at the beginning, I voted to remain, and I would campaign to remain. I would want to remain.
Okay, so you wouldn't support the deal that your party would negotiate? I mean,
no, I would support where the people got to in the final vote.
I have a lot of respect for Rachel and for Remainers who are unhappy with the situation. I just don't think it's a credible position. I think your question is the right one, sir, which is, if you believe in Remain, don't pretend you're going back to the EU to have a further negotiation to come up with a deal and then not say whether you're going to support it or not, which is Jeremy Corbyn's position. I'm afraid it is totally untenable.
Danny, what's untenable is the crash out.
Well, we can. I'm sure there will be questions about our deal. I'm very happy to talk about that.
The question doesn't.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. Anything you want to add, Jen?
So obviously the Liberal Democrats have in our manifesto that if we win a majority government, which I know is a bit of a long shot, but you never know, if we win a majority government, that we would revoke Article 50. If we don't, and we're having to work with the other parties, maybe there's a hung parliament or something like that, we will continue to campaign for a people's vote. That's very straightforward.
Right. Who was the lady at the back who said, why aren't the ladies getting questions? Has she gone outside now? No, it was at the back. Someone at the back. Oh, was it? It was you. It was you. Right, okay. There we are. No worries. Crack on.
Thank you. It would be nice if we could have questions from 4 women now.
Well done, please. Just you. Let's have your question.
Okay. Which party will legislate to redress the appalling prejudice, persecution and inequality experienced by the Gypsy, Roma, traveller and boat dweller community that is being made much worse by the lack of lawful transit and permanent sites and moorings?
Thank you.
And I have to declare an interest. I live on a boat without a permanent mooring.
Not a problem. You don't need to do that. It's a great question. It's a local question and it's a very important one. So thank you for that. Anyone would like to start?
Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah. So I live about 10 minutes from the canal and have a number of friends who live on barges actually. So this is not just a holiday situation, is it? As you were saying, it's about people who live on barges and who are bargee owners and travellers. And it's also a wider question about travellers and gypsies and so on. So let's just take the point about the change that was made, which meant that continuous cruising requires bargee travellers to travel long distances over quite a period in a continuous direction. Now that, to me, starts to be almost, it gets to the point of a discriminatory situation where bargee owners' children are unable to go to school very easily locally. That becomes a big problem. Or if people have particular needs in terms of medical and other social needs, it becomes more and more problematic. So I would like to see something that is much lighter touch than the regulation that's come into place more recently from the Canal and River Trust. I mean, more broadly, my background is in the world of equalities, and I have all my life campaigned for women, for minorities of all kinds, if you like. So I would always stand up for and want to hear from you more about what you feel the issues are that relate to us here locally. But yes, I think that some of the punishing and prejudicial way that minorities are treated locally is worrying, whether that's gypsy travellers or whether that's people from different backgrounds ethnically and so on. Yeah.
So the Green Party absolutely supports people that live perhaps rather more alternative lifestyles. We would, in a big thing that we do is we'd get rid of the Home Office. We think it is completely poisoned the way it's behaved. We would divide it into 2, and there'd be the Ministry of the Interior, which would be responsible for policing and things, but it would also have the duty to responsibility for protecting the fundamental rights of travellers. So I'm reading from our manifesto. So that's sort of one side of it, and then the other side would be a ministry that looks after immigration, so that we think that the whole Windrush thing has been, is really, really poisonous, and we've behaved really badly towards a large group of people, and that's one of the reasons why we do this.
Thank you.
So one of the core values of Liberal Democrats is that we believe in an open, tolerant and inclusive society. And it's not at the moment, and there's much work that needs to be done. I don't know personally too much about the rules along the canal, and if I was elected as your representative, I would love to speak to you about that. Because did you bring this up in 2017 as well? I remember a question on this in 2017 as well. So it's obviously an ongoing long-term issue. But we have, I was just really trying to find them in here and I couldn't find it. We have a whole section on promoting and supporting diversity and inclusion. So the Liberal Democrats have that as our core value.
Thank you.
Well, something I need to find out about. I'm afraid I don't know about the canal situation or the regulation of canal dwellers, so I won't comment on your specifics on that, madam. But on the more broader question of travelling communities. I think my basic principle is equality. Everybody must be treated the same, no matter if they're in settled communities or travelling communities. I'm concerned about the idea of light touch regulation for people who are living in travelling communities. We have a real problem, which might be what you're getting at, which is that children growing up in travelling communities have the lowest outcomes of any group in the UK. So something isn't working. And I'm not sure it's working for settled communities. No, just let him finish. I'm sorry. No, carry on, please. So we do need to do something. I think perhaps a review of life chances for children in traveller communities might be helpful, and I'd be very happy to talk more about the particular circumstances around the canal dwellers.
Okay. Madam, you wanted to make a point, and you seem desperate. Could you do it now?
My point is very specific to the Vice's constituency. We are predominantly the last person who won Harry won 46 success, so we're likely to have Conservative MP. What I want to ask you, there was a discussion
If it's very brief.
There was a discussion today on the Today programme about the likelihood of Boris Johnson not winning his seat. And if he didn't win his seat, and the Conservatives got a majority, there would be a by-election for him to get a new seat. What I want to know is, have you been involved in those discussions?
No.
And is Vice one of those selections?
I thought you wanted to make a point about the travelling question. No, well that will have to wait. I'm sorry, you've really rather wasted everyone's time. We're trying to hold this on. So we're going to go round to where are we now? There was one at the front. This lady here at the front, and then we'll go to the lady there at the back, and then we're going to move across to this side and do two down here.
Do you agree that the rising levels of poverty we are seeing today stems largely from Margaret Thatcher's time, when she sold off council houses without building any more to replace them? Since that time, after the Conservatives' buy-to-let schemes, a large proportion of this original council house stock is now owned by private landlords who charge their tenants huge rents, most of which, ironically, is paid by the taxpayer through housing benefits.
Thank you very much. Who would like to start on that? Are you going to go? Okay, we're going to go with Danny first, and then we'll move on.
No, sorry, I don't. And I think that the right to buy was in principle right in all areas. Didn't deliver the desired outcome because, as you say, a lot of the houses were quickly sold, but actually overwhelmingly it was a successful policy, and many families benefited hugely from the opportunity to buy their home, become homeowners, develop an asset that they could pass on to their children. So home ownership is a good thing, and we are now seeing more first-time buyers get on the housing ladder than we've had for over a decade. So things are improving. The overall problem remains a lack of supply of housing. Our country is growing. The demand for housing is growing for all sorts of reasons, and we need to meet that supply. And no government for a generation has met this demand for housing, new housing, and we're not either. But we do have the highest rate of house building for 30 years. 250,000 new houses being built every year. Not enough of them are affordable, and that's I think the question you're asking. We have a huge problem with affordability in our country and in this constituency too. The average house price is 10 times the average wage in the Devizes area, so that's a fundamental problem that people are grappling with. There's a huge range of solutions to it, which include more council house building, and Wiltshire Council is building new council houses. It includes more subsidies for first-time buyers, and it includes reforms to the mortgage market. So we need to get back to the days when you could get a 95% mortgage. People are paying rent so they can afford a mortgage. What they can't afford is the deposit. So we do need to reform the mortgage market, and that's what we are committed to doing, and to support renters as well. There's a whole range of policy, but there isn't a silver bullet, and I'm afraid just saying private house building is bad, private ownership is bad, we just need more state housing is not the answer to. Sorry to exaggerate your position, but there is no single solution, but we are committed on a broad range to moving forward and ensuring that there's enough housing.
Sort of helping first-time buyers, it's very nice for those first-time buyers. Making mortgages easy to get is obviously nice for the people who get them. The result is that house prices go up. So that that means more inequality, and the people who win from that are the people who are selling the houses, because the house price has gone up. So actually that doesn't help. So what you do need to do is you need more council houses, and you need to stop selling the council houses and keep the council stock, so that there are the council houses for the people that can't possibly afford to buy.
I would agree with what Emma's saying there. There's a fundamental issue here about the dearth of affordable, truly affordable homes. So our young people in this constituency find it increasingly difficult to buy, or even in some cases rent, in this area. There is a commitment, there should be a commitment, that 30% of all new developments should be affordable housing, shouldn't they? That's our understanding. That simply hasn't been happening locally, and we've looked into this quite a bit. I mean, just to give you one figure, the latest information I have is that Wiltshire Council's built about 155 new affordable housing in the last 3 years. Now that's a very, very small number. So we have to turn that around. And what Labour would say is we absolutely, again, we do need to take real action, strong action, to build back our affordable or social council housing, and not to sell it off, as Emma was saying. So we would build around 100,000 new builds. They would be properly insulated. We do a lot of retrofitting too, because the quality of our housing stock is at a real low now. There's been very little investment over a long period. So it seems to me this is another example of where we need to really take a strategic, long-term visionary look and say, we need to invest in this country. We need to invest in our housing.
It is a matter of demand and supply. If there aren't enough houses, the cost will go up. So therefore we need to build more houses. So the Liberal Democrats are proposing that we would build 300,000 new houses a year, 100,000 of which would be for social housing. We also would help with a sort of, what's it called? Rent-to-own, that's why I was just looking up the name of it, the rent-to-own model for social housing. So the more you live in the same property, you will slowly own more of that house to the point that you would own outright after 30 years. We'd also do with the help to rent, because I'm aware that obviously for young people getting that deposit is really hard. So we would have the government deposit scheme for first-time renters who are under 30. And again, these houses need to be built to be carbon neutral as much as possible, and all of that sort of thing as well.
Thank you. Right, I said this lady here, and then we're going to move across to that side. So it's this lady here. Thank you, and then we're moving across.
I want to know what policies each party has to reduce the use of food banks. And I'm told that the number of people using Marlborough's food bank has gone up again this year.
Thank you. The use of food banks.
Well, we'd get rid of universal credit and go back to the previous benefits, because the universal credit has proved to be a disaster, and I think is putting, people having to wait to get their money is causing huge problems. In a more general way, our policy is to have a universal basic income. So that's everybody would get £89 a week, whether or not they're working. Pensioners get more, and so that makes, and that makes relieves the sort of financial stress a lot of people feel. That would be on top of housing benefit, and if people need it, disability benefit. And those disability benefits, we get rid of the outsourcing to firms that have this sort of checkbox system, which is also a disaster, and we put it back in the hands of medical professionals.
This comes back to my opening speech about the social contract being broken, and it's appalling how now, I remember when food banks first came in, and it was kind of like, oh, what's that about? And now just how it's mainstream, it's in every town. So we need to address that. So we need to obviously review the living wage to make sure that everyone has a fair income. We need to
That's all right. Would you like to, we can come back to you, right? So.
Okay, go on.
Okay, so thank you for the question about food banks. And we're all very aware now in Marlborough, Devizes, Pewsey, where we see food banks, and many of us probably volunteer in them. It is very worrying, isn't it, that they are part of our normal everyday life. There was an article published on Thursday in the Gazette and Herald where Liz Starling, who runs the Devizes Food Bank, was saying that they've seen a 44% rise just in the last year. It really is quite staggering. Now, Labour would be very honest about this. We would say, actually, we need to end that. We need to end that in 3 years. This is food poverty. A lot of people are using food banks who are in work. And this is just not acceptable in a country that is... We are one of the richest countries in the world. This isn't acceptable. It's just not how any of us want to continue. So, to answer your question, that's what we would do.
Thank you.
I think I've probably spent more time working directly with people who are living in poverty than any of my opponents on the panel here. And I can simply say this: poverty is a very, very complicated question, and it can't be reduced to the simple statistic about how much food bank use is going on. There's always been poverty, there's always been food poverty. And what we're seeing is the formalisation of that problem, and this amazing response by churches and charities to support people living in poverty through the food bank system. And the great advantage of the food bank system, and I've spoken a lot to the Trussell Trust, who oversee the majority of the country's food banks, is that because it is a more formalised response, it enables people who are living in poverty to get the professional support that they need, and it helps particularly in challenging the problems of the benefit system that lead people into the need for food banks. So I think just simply pointing to the rise of food banks as a suggestion of some kind of huge growth in poverty is not reflected in other statistics. But, as I say, I'm very sensitive to and have personal experience of many of the social injustices in our communities, and I'm not dismissing them. What I think needs to happen is not a return to the previous benefit system, which trapped people in dependence, trapped people in poverty, involved them in enormous complications in their personal finances because of the intermingling of all these different benefit systems. The last Labour government began the consolidation of the benefit system into a single system, which we then, when we took over with the Liberal Democrats in 2010, renamed Universal Credit. And that system is about greater simplicity and clarity, so people know how much money they're going to get. I'm not defending the workings of the system in every case, but actually in the overwhelming majority of cases that we don't hear about in the press, the system is working because it is simpler and is more interconnected to the jobs market and to the way that people earn money, which is on a monthly basis. But many people, for lots of reasons, are not coping, and they just don't have enough money to get by, and so they're having to rely on the charity of their neighbours. And I applaud the food bank movement and the churches and all the other parts of our community that enable that. And there is many complicated reasons and complicated responses to the food bank or to the problem of poverty in our communities. Fundamentally, we need stronger communities. We need people to be helped when they fall on hard times. And there isn't some big state response that's going to fix that. It's about businesses, it's about communities. Yes, it's about the state as well. I'm not denying the importance of a welfare system. I support it. but we actually need stronger communities, we need better jobs, we need more support for families. So nothing is simple in this area, I'm afraid.
Right, we're going to go here. You managed to leap up. So we're going to take one here, and then we're going to have, after that, we're going to have the gentleman with the glasses behind you. Okay, so we know how it's working.
I'm absolutely appalled that the Conservative candidate seems to be in complete denial about the extent of child poverty. Earlier this year, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Poverty exposed the scale of poverty in the UK. And more recently, the Institute for Fiscal Policy projects that child poverty will rise in its current level of over 4 million at the moment to 5.2 million children in 2021. This is largely due to cuts in social security. I want to know what you will do about the two-child policy, which the Conservatives have brought in, which means that children, a third child born into a family, they're limited.
You want to know?
I want to know if restricting the life chances of children growing up in poverty is really worth the price to keep taxes low.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I think aimed at Danny, but would anyone else want to start off, or just let you loose?
No, probably start.
Yep.
So I think your question gets to the centre again of maybe a fundamental difference between us. Is poverty something that can be tackled by a charitable response, by local people doing what they can as volunteers? We've all responded how we've chosen to when we've seen poverty on our streets. And what I hear from volunteers, and what I hear from the food bank actually, is that volunteers are exhausted. We can't actually find and recruit enough volunteers. It's not sustainable. And it seems to me that there is a very important role that the state needs to play in this. Our public services are so run down now that we are resorting to, and I just cannot agree with this idea that somehow food banks are a good thing. I really struggle with that. And to your question about poverty, as you say, a 60-year high under the Conservative government. Again, that's disgraceful. That's disgraceful. So, you asked about life chances. It seems to me, again, we need to turn this on its head. And we need to say, our children and our grandchildren must be allowed to thrive. What I've been hearing in stories lately is desperate stories about young people who do not feel they have a future, who feel completely let down by their country. And the levels of deprivation that we're seeing, believe it or not, in Wiltshire we have parts of our community, here in Marlborough and elsewhere, that fall into the top 30% of deprivation in the country. So that includes Glasgow, inner London, etc. Now again, that really brings it home to me. So we have to turn it around, and we have to, yes, in partnership with communities, but we need to have a strong and a healthy set of public services that deliver housing, education, and all of the other good jobs that we've been talking about, particularly with regard to the climate emergency, where we can bring in these new green jobs. Put that all together, and it is actually a transformation of our economy, and it is what's needed. We can't tinker at the edges anymore.
Thank you.
So I think I agree with Rachel entirely. Just to add, out of the larger European economies, for sure, we are the most unequal society so that, if you take our rich areas and compare them to our poor areas, we are the most unequal. So that proves that it is possible to run wealthy economies without having so much inequality.
Thank you.
So inequality is falling. I'm afraid to tell my colleagues here there's a real problem with wealth inequality, assets, but actually the gap between the rich and the poor is closing in this country, as it is in the West. Anyway, it's not. I know it's not the conventional wisdom, but it is in fact the truth. It is in fact the truth. We do. I mean, if we're talking generally about the economy and about poverty, the problem is wage stagnation. Ordinary people have not had a wage rise in 20 years across the West. This is not a problem that's unique to the UK. It's common across the West because technology and globalisation is taking jobs away from working people in the West. Globalisation has been good for the world's population. Huge increase in incomes for the bulk of the population of the world, the developing world. In the developed world, it is working people who are suffering. And that is at the core of many of these questions that we're facing. And the question is, has the state got enough money to fix it? And I don't think it has. We need businesses, we need communities to step in with the support of the state. The lady actually asked about the two-child policy, which
yes.
I think it's a complicated one, but I'm afraid I don't take the view that the state should just continue to subsidise families who have children and are unable to support them. Actually, people respond to incentives, and I have a lot of experience of this. If you talk to probation officers, if you talk to social workers, they say often the worst thing that can happen to a single mum who's in a whole load of crisis in their lives to have another child. And actually, we shouldn't be sending a signal that children are cost-free. And it shouldn't be the case that the rest of they're not. So I think so this is not some kind of heartless policy. It is a response to the reality that many of our communities face, and people need support without question. But I'm not sure that I don't think it follows automatically that you should have the same amount of child benefit for any number of children. No, I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think we can disagree on that very last point. So the Liberal Democrats will certainly remove the two-child limit on the benefit of that. Also, we would like to invest £6 billion per year to make the benefit system work better for people, and to reduce the wait for that first payment for universal credit to 5 days rather than 5 weeks, because that is fundamentally where the issue really gets people in a very desperate situation, and to increase in-work allowances, and to abolish the bedroom tax. Let's get rid of that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We had the lady, gent rather, wasn't it, with the glass I said was going to be next. So over to you, and then.
My question.
No. We're playing. We've had questions on that side, questions on this side. Please carry on.
On defence. There's been research in Russia in terms of.
Sorry, we need the microphone up. Is it on? Is the red light on?
Can you hear me now?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Questions on defence. You have a resurgent Russia in terms of activity in Ukraine, Crimea, on the Baltic states, Syria, even killing people on British soil. You have a lot of instability within the world. What is the Parliament's view with respect to future defence policy?
Thank you. The view of future defence policy. Who would like to start? Jim.
So we're committed to spending the 2% of GDP on defence. Now, obviously, if we remain in the EU, our economy will be bigger. That will be more money on defence than if we leave. We are also committed to in NATO and those other. To NATO.
Just keep going.
Oh, sorry, I've been hearing an echo and suddenly it went quiet, so there we go. Yes, so we're committed to the other, multinational institutions such as NATO.
Right, can we try this microphone? Emma, is that not working? Yeah.
Hello? Hello?
We'll get you back.
Shall I try again? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
We're going to finish in about 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and get some more questions going. Right, off we go.
Apparently I need to be a bit closer, there we go. Okay, so just to recap, I'm not sure if you've caught that before, we were committed to the 2% of GDP on defence and to continuing with the multinational institutions that are NATO and that sort of thing. Obviously, we would like to remain as part of the EU, and that helps us be involved in all of those other sort of joint initiatives. That's good. Sorry, I'm really losing my words this evening. I do apologise.
So this is personal. I actually come from a military family. Not a lot of people know, but my dad was in the SAS, and my grandpa helped to liberate Bergen-Belsen actually in World War II. So it's very personal. And we need to get beyond the party stereotypes here. So Labour would support military personnel, and I would absolutely stand up for our military personnel here locally. We were in Tidworth last night. So again, we would commit to a sensible amount, 2% or possibly slightly more of GDP on defence and on renewal of Trident. And what we need to ask ourselves is why is it that the army numbers have actually fallen in the last 10 years or so? From about 102,000 in 2010 to just over 74,000. So Labour in government would call a defence review, and we would look in particular to what our military colleagues call the fifth dimension, so that the cyber warfare. That seems to me absolutely essential. We need to be looking at the security of our country in that sense, and that's become a bigger and bigger issue for us more recently. I personally would want to commit to reviewing a couple of key areas with regards to our military personnel locally, because of course it's a big issue for us here. And one would be housing. So that the housing issues around our military rebasing are actually, there's some really quite worrying things going on there. So for example, the selling off of military properties has meant that soldiers are now having to rent back properties, and the suggestion going forward is actually there will not be the same help as has happened in the past, and that soldiers and their families would have to enter the private rented sector market each time they moved. Can you imagine what that would mean? So that's a big area for me I would want to help. And the other would be actually mental health. I've talked to a number of local soldiers, and this is something they worry about a lot. One said to me recently, and this was a very moving moment actually. We were in the Ram pub in Tidworth, and he said to me, "Rachel, it feels like I have served my country, but you are not serving me." And I think that's something we need to really address. Yeah, put right.
I think the question was about Russia rather than support for our soldiers and their families. I do echo what Rachel said in the absolute imperative of doing that in this constituency. On Russia, sir, we face an enemy. We face an enemy that is committed to undermining our democracy and our security, and we need to absolutely confront it resolutely. And the way to do that is by investment in cyber technology and in all the different forms of asymmetric warfare which they practice. And we need to be extremely vigilant and particularly support NATO in its defence against a resurgent Russia. And it's not all about guns and ships, but it is partly about guns and ships. And I would go further than our 2% commitment. I think we do need to build up the army. I echo the point. I think it is a real shame that a Conservative government or a Conservative coalition, the Liberal Democrats, cut the armed forces so much over the last 10 years. We do need to rebuild. We need to build up our armed forces once again.
Carry on.
We agree absolutely that we must have an army that to defend our country. I also agree with Danny about the cyber. We need to build up our cyber defence, because I think that will be something which will get bigger in the future. However, we don't believe that nuclear weapons make either us or the world safer. We think that we should not have our Trident nuclear weapons, and that would make the world a safer place and save us a lot of money. We do not believe that we should be sending troops to fight foreign wars. That also makes us less safe at home, because invariably we end up, killing some people we shouldn't kill, who then get rather annoyed about that, and I think that makes us less safe. We would use our troops for peacekeeping, and in the future, what will become more and more important is we're going to see bigger and bigger climate disasters worldwide and here. And I think our troops are going to be absolutely needed to help when, when the floods strike, the fires come, all of that sort of thing.
So we'll have one more question from around here. Yes, so, your question. We'll have a microphone, then we're going to have a question here, and then I fear that we're going to be heading towards time, but we'll see how we go.
We've talked about Brexit, we've talked about the environmental crisis.
Speak nice and loud.
Well, we've talked about Brexit and we've talked about the environmental crisis, but realistically it's our generation that's going to be facing the problems in 10, 15 years. Why aren't we allowed to vote now?
So the question, I'll repeat it back if you like, as best I can, thank you. So the question from this young lady at the front was, we've heard about the climate crisis, we've heard about Brexit, but it is my generation that will have to fix the problems. What about reducing the voting age to, what do you think? 60. Totally agree. So that's good, isn't it? I got involved in politics because of my kids, quite honestly. They're probably a little bit older than you, but not that much. I had conversations with them where they talked about how sad they were about the future for themselves. And I worry enormously about our children, and in fact our grandchildren, that will have to, some of our grandchildren, that will be having to pick up the pieces, frankly. And that is why the climate emergency is so important, and how we respond to it now. In a way, we've been led by the children, haven't we, with Greta Thunberg and others. They've stood up and showed leadership where some of our political leaders have not. And I think now is the time to respond to that, and to work together. And yes, I agree, 16, absolutely. That makes total sense to me. And it is the case in Scotland, I think I'm right in saying, aren't I? But that's the case, so why not here?
So I'm very glad that Greta Thunberg is not in charge of our response to climate change. I don't think it's appropriate to put children in charge of policy, I'm afraid. So the question, well, just responding to Rachel. So do I think that the voting age should be reduced to 16? I'm afraid not. I don't think that's right. The experience of children and young people is absolutely vital, but as with the rest of decisions that are made, those are mediated largely through the family and through communities. So I'm afraid we don't, to be extremely blunt, we do not have faith in the judgment of people who haven't yet voted for the maturity. We just don't. I invite parents among you to ask which of you will let your 15-year-olds determine every decision in their lives. We don't do that. We don't do that. There are various points. We're not very clear in this country about which moment adulthood begins, and maybe we should be, but actually, as we all know, different people grow up at different stages. So for different moments of life, driving, smoking, serving in the armed forces, paying taxes, there are different moments, and one of them is voting, and we say that's 18, and I think that's appropriate. We can argue about it, but I'm afraid there isn't some great moral principle here. Because if there is, then why not 14? Why not 14-year-olds? Why not 9-year-olds? We decide to have a cut-off. There isn't something, disrespect being shown to young people to say, wait till you're 18 before we have the vote. I think we're doing the right thing by keeping it at 18.
The Green Party absolutely believes that younger people should have the vote. I think people have even discussed having it even younger than 16, but at the moment 16 is our policy, and that we would work to push that through.
Votes for 16-year-olds are in the Liberal Democrat manifesto, and it's something that we've long campaigned for. I went to visit West Lavington School, and I spoke to the sixth formers there, and I tell you, if you think questions have been tough tonight, it was something like it at West Lavington School, and they kept me on my toes for sure. I have long conversations with my son. He is 15, and he takes real thought into what he's thinking about. He asks really insightful questions, and he takes it quite seriously. And yes, I would trust him with the vote, even though he's 15 rather than 16, but maybe let's just stick with 16, let's not go too far. But I think you're absolutely right. I think not everyone at 16 will have an opinion and will want to vote, just like not everyone at 20 does, like not everyone at 30 does. So if you are wanting to vote, then get registered, and let's give you 16-year-olds to vote.
Put your hand up, I don't know how many times. So you're irresistible with your flashing orange.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yes. Thank you. This is a question mainly for Danny Kruger, and it ties together two things that we just had. And can I just say, Danny Kruger is much better looking in the second question than he was in my question is very short. The undisputed fact that the Russian troll farms put a lot of effort into securing a Brexit vote in 2016, as they put into securing Donald Trump's election in the United States. Does this not give you some modest reservations about the wisdom of the policy?
Come on, you might as well start.
Yeah, I'm a bit perplexed by the question. I mean, it's certainly true that Russia, they just wanted to cause trouble, and Brexit would cause more trouble, so that's why they supported it. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. I mean, if we just want an easy life to keep things as they are, then if that's the reason for voting Remain. But no, they were definitely trying to disrupt, and I think they were spewing around advice in all sorts of different directions. They support Scottish independence, they support Basque independence. They basically want to disrupt the status quo. That's what the Russian troll factories do. It doesn't, I'm afraid, it doesn't give me cause to doubt the wisdom of Brexit. No, sir.
Right, okay, no, it's not a backwards and forwards. Any other questions on that? Go on then, quickly, and then really rapid fire. We had someone at the Open World.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go.
I take you back to trust. Mr. Kruger, you told me at Pusey that you were quite happy to work for the Liar. No. You were happy to work for the Liar. And it's because, of course, you worked in the Garden when you wrote speeches for Cameron and for Ian Duncan Smith. And
what's the question?
It's quite clear for the candidates. Is it true that we now should be represented, we the people should be represented by the people, rather than what's quite clearly a failed old boys club?
Or do I just let Danny go for that? Go on then. Quick as you can, please.
No.
Yeah. Raise it back. No, not you.
An enormous ecological.
There we are.
We face an ecological emergency on the brink of the 6th mass extinction. How would you deal with that immediately that you get into power? Elected.
Thank you. Someone else wants to start? Emma, I think this is one for you to start with.
Yes, of course, you're quite right. Well, we need to bring in, we need to look after our nature really well and make sure that we preserve habitats for all of all of our wildlife, and we need to make sure that we have the right regulation so that we're not destroying the palm trees and the orangutan habitats abroad and things. So that we need to do something about climate change so we don't kill off the coral reefs and a lot of the life in the sea. Absolute priority.
Okay, just to add to that, I guess it's also very relevant, isn't it, to think about our farming community. And one of the things that I would want to do is work in partnership with our farming community as we transition to a new green economy. So I think we do desperately need this transition period, and it needs to happen, as you said, from the minute that we start in government. And that's back to this idea of a bold vision. I just want to say one thing about the Old Boys Network that's failed, which is, somebody said, oh, please don't say this, but I am going to, because I can't resist it. But I am very concerned that we should move on from the Old Boys Network. And if you don't mind a culinary thing, we move on from the Eton mess, frankly, that has been going on over the last few years.
So, with regards to the Eton mess that you're referring to as well. Oh, sorry. Lost my thread now. Yes, basically. Basically, yes, I think Parliament will work best when it's represented by everybody who lives in the United Kingdom instead of some kind of political elite. I think Parliament needs to have everyone from every religion, every race, and whatever is represented here. I think I am aware that I am not the best public speaker, but I'm a problem solver. So that is my core skill, and that's what I would like to bring. The climate emergency.
Joe, we can't. Sorry, we're up to time. Last thing. Could we hand over here? I've lost track of who's spoken. Yeah.
So very quickly, we do need a broad range of policies to address ecological change, and there is genuinely a problem. But it's about investment in the environment, in the landscape, support for the innovation that will reduce carbon, support for our farmers to make sure that they're effective stewards of the land and of livestock. I'm sorry, I don't have a single solution, but there's a whole bunch of stuff, and it's just got to be taken incredibly seriously, but not at a speed that will crash our economy. So we need to maintain human livelihoods while we protect our environment, and they've got to be done together, otherwise it's a catastrophe. That would be a catastrophe.
Really sorry, I'm sort of holding the arms of the hands of the watch back here, because we are opposite. It's an opportunity now for the four candidates to give a and I do ask for very, very brief little roundup, and then we're going to talk. So there's a little bit of time, people to meet them and talk to the candidates afterwards. So, let's start.
So at last night's Hustings in Tidworth, Danny described the Labour manifesto as Marxist. I don't think Danny's perhaps read Marx, but many of the proposals in the Labour manifesto are mainstream in other European countries, none of whom I would describe as Marxist. And that's also true about the amount of tax that we would be asking the very richest to pay, not as high as in other European countries. So under a Labour government, the ratio of spending on public services would still be lower than other European countries. We will put our energy into rebuilding Britain, widening prosperity beyond the City of London with a thriving manufacturing base. We would end the gross inequality in our country with a sensible and compassionate approach that does not demonise the homeless, immigrants or the vulnerable. And will support our food and farming producers, not selling them out to poor, cheap US food imports. I was speaking to a farmer just yesterday about this and how worried he is on that particular point. Labour's bold vision is for real change, a green industrial revolution putting people and planet before profit and privilege.
The government has been so tied up in Brexit that none of the other important issues have been addressed. So we have a simple choice at this election. We could have the ultra-hard Brexit demanded by what is left of the Conservative Party, or we can think again. We see clearly now that Brexit is the worst deal in history, and it's likely to lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom. Vote to keep the United Kingdom, a country of influence that plays a full role within the EU. Also vote to fix our broken political system, to protect our planet and to rebuild a society that cares about all of its citizens. Vote Liberal Democrat.
So I did say Corbyn's a Marxist, perhaps I shouldn't, but he said that himself. He and John McDonnell have both confessed that they support the teachings of Karl Marx, and certainly their manifesto does reflect that. It proposes to introduce the most corporate, much more radical than 1945, much more radical than 1983 Labour manifesto. They're proposing to introduce the most punishing corporate tax regime in the world. What will that do to jobs? Jobs and investment. Yes, it's one of the lowest in the world. We have the most competitive tax regime. They're proposing to make it the most punitive. They're proposing to take 10% of companies' shares. Again, what impact would that have on investment and jobs? The reason to vote Conservative is a simple one. It's actually not purely about the economy. It is about honouring the vote of the people. We need to get Brexit done, ladies and gentlemen. We need to move beyond this appalling division in our country that is reflected in our discussion tonight. One way of moving, one option is to try and go back and have years more referendums, more endless debate and division, and the incredible betrayal of the majority of voters who in 2016 believed the government when the government said it would honour the referendum, and it has not done so because the parties represented here, my colleagues here, their parties, having promised to honour the referendum, decided not to do so. And Labour in particular, which stood on a manifesto in 2017 to see Brexit through, decided it wouldn't do so. So Parliament has let down the people, and we need to honour the referendum and get it done, and then bring our country together. Then invest in our public services and in infrastructure to spread prosperity and to move forward. The alternative is years more division. So we must do it. And speaking personally, if I'm elected, I genuinely want to be the MP for everyone here. You've got to have an MP from one party or another, and I'm sure we'll all say the same. Whoever it is has got to build our community, strengthen it from the grassroots, bring people together, support all the amazing public services and charities and churches and businesses that exist here. That is my real passion and commitment, but we've got to see Brexit through so that we can have the kind of country that we want. Thank you.
So, whichever of us becomes MP, the questions about money and how we pay for things are going to be absolutely key. And with my understanding of economics, I think I can really bring something. However, I realise that it's possible that I might not win here. But if you're thinking of voting tactically, please do check the polls and be very careful that you don't waste your vote when voting for a party you don't really believe in. It won't actually make any difference. So even if I don't win, a vote for the Green Party will still influence how seriously our policies are taken, and our policies are making a difference. You know, so we've been talking about the Green New Deal since 2008 when Caroline Lucas first brought it, and now it's also Labour Party policy. So so our policies are making a difference. So we're planning on bringing a private members' bill on the Green New Deal, which we can do without forming a government, and also a private members' bill on a people's vote to ratify the deal about Brexit, and a private members' bill to reinstate the NHS, reversing the privatisation that's happened since 2012 and giving £6 billion of extra funding a year to the NHS. We, as a country, we were a great country, and we invented the machines powered by fossil fuels to start the Industrial Revolution. And that has made a difference. It's improved the lives of billions of people around the planet. But let's really make this country great again and lead the world and show the world how to live prosperous, happy lives without fossil fuels. If you vote... If you vote Green in this election, your vote will count.
Obviously, to the very last bit now, I think we should all applaud you for an excellent set of questions. So thank you, all of you. I'm sorry to those of you who did not get your question asked, but we're going to be here for a little while, I guess, yes? So feel free to come and speak to the candidates, but thank you, all of you, for taking the time to be with us this evening. Thank you very much.